Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Lazovic, and thank you for joining us this evening for what I've been told is the most anticipated public presentation by the Berners Township School District this year. I had no idea that option 2 was a household term in Berners Township when I took the job. It did not come up in the interview process not once. And then the day after I took the job, first thing out of everyone's mouth was, welcome, option 2, let's talk. So here we are to talk. Thank you all for coming out. The intent of tonight is to be informational. We've been going through a multi-year process. We've had communications issues. We've been dealing with COVID and the rest, and everyone has been patient. Everyone has been open and shared feedback, and we've gotten through a year with some changes, but what we'd like to do tonight is go back to the beginning, talk about how we got to where we are and where we feel we need to get to as clearly as we possibly can so that you all leave here with an understanding of why we're saying what we're saying and exactly what we mean for 2022 moving forward. We will be clear about everything, and we will also open up at the end. If you have questions about the information, we want to make sure we try and clarify them all now because we are taping this session, and we will put it on the website, so if you could not attend or if you enjoy it so much, you want to go back and watch it again, you can do that. But we want to get the information out. Once the presentation is done, there's a form at the end, and we will share that out, not just in the presentation, but directly to the larger community, where we will be taking feedback for the next 2.5 weeks. So hopefully people understand what it is we're actually saying, and then after they process that, then they give us feedback on what they feel about that and how that supports the school district and our students moving forward. We will review all the feedback. That's why we're giving us some time, a couple weeks, and share with the Board of Education, again, our final recommendations based on that feedback, and then we will announce in March what next year moving forward will look like. Early on, we will open up the website. We're actually going to have Ms. Howarth and I a few informational sessions with the students so that everyone is clear, and then we will keep the information unchanged in the same spot on the website. We will send out reminders when we can to try and make sure everyone's on the same page, and as you're going to see, I think we're trying to make things a little bit easier and more clear as we move forward. So, I am joined by our Assistant Superintendent, Ms. Fox, our Athletic Director, Mr. Shello, and one of our 4 assistant principals who has the honor of overseeing Option 2 here at the high school, Ms. Howarth, and they will be presenting with me. So again, thanks, and we're going to, if it's okay with you, dive right in. First and foremost, what we want to try and do is set a level playing field with what Option 2 actually is. As an academic institution accredited by the state, we have to follow certain code and certain guidelines in order to prove that students have earned their high school diploma. Option 2, what it does is makes available to school districts other avenues beyond their own program to allow students to have experiences beyond the school and, most importantly, demonstrate the required mastery of core curriculum content standards in order to graduate. And that is what Option 2 does. And so Option 2 takes on a manner of forms in different districts based on what programs they have in-house and what opportunity they want to provide for the students that's in line with the core curriculum standards required by the state. And so here, we've had a storied history with Option 2, but there are basically 3 forms that Option 2 exists for our students currently. The first is if a student has failed in-house material and needs to remediate and make up, they can do so through Option 2. They can take an approved academic course. They go through the supervisor to make sure that the course is rigorous, that it actually aligns with the necessary standards. They can take that course, they take assessments to demonstrate accountability, and then they receive the credit that they had lost for their internal program. The second one is if there's a specific course academically that is not offered, there's no similar course offered here, and it's an opportunity that makes sense for a student, we would vet that program as well, and the same thing. It has to align with specific standards. It offers a different opportunity than we are able to right now, and the student goes out through the program, comes back, and we, through accountability and assessment, make sure that they've mastered the standards, and then they receive credit. The third one is the one I think everyone's here to talk about, which is that we also offer an Option 2 avenue for health and physical education. And there are really 2 ways you can meet the standards currently, which is, the first is if you play a ridge sport. You're playing a sport that's in-house where we hire the people, we run the program. That is one way where you can then apply for Option 2 and demonstrate mastery of the core content standards and receive credit for your health and physical education. And the other one is for off-site activities where, much like the academic programs I described, we would vet a program and ask specific activities, see if it aligns to our core content standards, and then we approve a student to go through that. They go through the process and then through some form of assessment and accountability, prove that they've mastered the standards, and we can provide them credit for a standard that is required by the state of New Jersey for graduation. And so that is what we're talking about. How can we use the code as it's written to provide as many opportunities for students? So that being said, why are we here talking about changes? Well, apparently we've been talking about changes in option 2 for a very long time. One of the things we would like to do is come to terms as a community as to what it is we're trying to achieve and what we're able to do once and for all. Make it clear, post it, and then share it like crazy with all of our students and families so they can take advantage of the different opportunities it provides. But one of the things we found for a long time is that many of the opportunities we have been approving in the past do not align with the core content standards. They do not meet the requirements as spelled out in option 2, and therefore we should not be giving credit for a required graduation standard, but we have been. The other piece is that we have to ensure, based on the core content standards, that the different programs actually align with health and physical education standards, and that the opportunities presented, while wonderful for students, actually demonstrate a higher level of requirement, whether it's time commitment, activity, as well as connection to the variety of standards that goes through our health and physical education program. We have to ensure that the kids are meeting all the standards as written, otherwise we should not be providing graduation credit. And then finally, and again, academic and athletic are similar, we want to make sure that there's consistency across how option 2 is applied for the high school. Whether it's an athletic program, health and physical education, or a separate academic program, there has to be consistency across the board, and we've been talking about that for a while. What's interesting coming in new to this ongoing conversation is you learn the history, or you learn various takes on the history, depending on with whom you're speaking. And what was truly interesting to me is that option 2 here, at least the health and physical education avenue, came about in this district not for students, but actually to support both budget and staffing changes that were going on in the district. And then as an opportunity, it was seen as a way to support students and allow different opportunities. The issue with that is, with that being kind of the foundational decision, it's gone and kind of grown in a way that's actually not in line with option 2. And so we've had to kind of pull back the reins. I know there's been ongoing back and forth conversation, but what we want to make clear is option 2 is an opportunity, whether academic or health and physical education, that we want to make sure it continues here in district, which is why we work so hard to find the right answer for the program, listen to folks, and we're still going to continue to listen to you, but come up with an answer once and for all so we can be clear, demonstrate that the students going through the various activities, programs, on-site and off, are meeting standards, and provide the certification of the graduation credit as we're required to do. And so that's what we're here to talk about. So this year we made a number of changes. Some were communicated well, some were not, and when they were not, and we heard from everyone, we tried to pull back on those so that no one was injured, and we want to make sure people understand we are listening and we're trying to communicate well. But we did make certain changes this year, and those changes have had an impact. And to talk about those changes, who better than the person who has been overseeing them, Ms. Howard.
Thank you, Dr. Lazovic. So just to talk to you about some of the changes that we made for this current year for option 2. Before, obviously, we can talk about where we're going with option 2, we'll talk about some of the changes that we made for this year and the impact of those changes. Sorry, a little out of order there. So the first thing that changed is all freshmen are participating in year-long either physical education or health. Our HPE teachers worked over the course of last summer to recreate a freshman-specific HPE curriculum that encompasses, obviously, Project Adventure, as it always has in the past, their one marking period of health, as it always has in the past, but also we've added in some freshman-specific content such as skill-based or the basic fundamentals of fitness and wellness. The application for the off-site activities changed for this year. It does include a letter from their coach And it also includes some information from our students. So asking them for a little bit more information about the activity that they're engaged in, and also how it might align with our curricular standards. The students for offsite are now required to turn in weekly logs instead of at the end of the marking period. This actually ended up working out very well in the students' favor, and we'll talk about that in a moment on the next slide when we talk about the impacts of the changes. They've always had to fill out logs with their time commitment to their offsite facility. This is the first year, though, that we're asking them to turn it in weekly as opposed to at the end of the marking period. Off-site students are now being asked to complete an end of the marking period assignment. I think if you ask any of our off-site students or athletes, I think they'll tell you that this is not a daunting task. It's something that's simply asking them to explain in their own words how they are fulfilling their health and physical education curriculum through their activity that they are completing outside of the district. The students have been very creative in what they're turning in, whether it's video of them performing or competing in their off-site activity, or some of them are simply writing a few paragraphs that describe, really based on we're letting students choose their method of describing. And our option 2 advisors, all of our off-site students are being assigned to an option 2 off-site advisor, who are actually our health and physical education staff. And they're maintaining Google Classrooms where they can communicate with their students, and also a place for the students to be able to upload any of their weekly assignments. So I would say that one of the largest and the greatest impact that we've had is in the off-site communication that we have now with our students. In years past, our off-site athletes only had to turn in those logs at the end of the marking period. Now they're turning in weekly, where we're able to communicate with them more frequently. So it would be in the past where students would turn in logs for their off-site activity, and it would be only then that we discover they didn't meet the required minimum number of minutes. We actually had more students failing option 2 than we have in the last 2 marking periods that we've been completing it this way. There's that opportunity when they are not turning in logs weekly for teachers to reach out and say, hey, listen, in order to meet your minimum, you need to make sure you're turning these in. And we've had very few, if any, failures at this point because of those frequent check-ins. We've put more responsibility on the students, specifically in terms of the coach's evaluation. So in years past, it's always been the school reaching out to the coaches, trying to get them to fill out and sign an evaluation. That proved to be a very daunting task, where coaches didn't recognize the email, they weren't checking their email. We had a very hard time hunting down coaches and getting our evaluations back and signed in a timely manner. We've asked our students to bring the evaluation to their coaches, and we're finding that we're getting them back in a timely manner, and we're getting them all back, which has proved to be a really great change. We have an improved alignment between our on-site or RHS sports and our off-site athletes. It is something that you'll see in a moment when we talk a little bit more about the changes moving forward, something that we are focusing on, as well as all of the things that Dr. Lazovic mentioned. And we're getting an opportunity to vet the programs that our off-site students are engaged in. So not only are the students describing their activity, we're getting a letter from that coach that explains what the students are doing. And as we'll describe, what we are looking for in the future is to performing or having it be similar to our academic option 2, where we are vetting the programs, and we will have certain programs that are vetted and approved prior to, as long as students are meeting the minimum number of minutes that we require. So we believe that the changes that were made, while, as Dr. Lazovic said, maybe not the best rollout in terms of some of them, but we do think overall, now that we have 1 semester under our belt and 2 marking periods of option 2, we do feel like we are moving in the right direction in terms of doing things that are going to benefit our students. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Shallow, where he's going to talk a little bit about what is coming for, or what we're suggesting for next year. Did you want to go back to that slide?
Sure.
The objective?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Hi, good evening. I have a kind of a unique perspective on this. First of all, having lived through most of the history since I've been here, but also wearing two hats in my position as the Director of Athletics on one side and the Supervisor of Health and Physical Education on the other side. So I want to share with you a little bit about the overall program as well, and follow up to Dr. Lazovic and Ms. Howarth, and then talk about changes coming down the road. All right, so first of all, the objective of our Option 2 physical education program from an athletic standpoint and from a curricular standpoint, as mentioned, is to provide alternate pathways for students to earn credit in physical education through activities done outside the classroom. So this is your high school sports, your programs, whether it's dance, horseback riding, equestrian, gymnastics, whatever it might be. Where students can pursue and go in greater depth than they would in a regular physical education class. To encourage student participation, to get involved in these rigorous activities. We think that's an awesome thing for the kids. It shouldn't be in just a school day, homework, and rinse, wash, repeat, but to be involved in as many activities as possible. We stress that in our extracurricular programs in athletics, as well as our co-curricular programs with the clubs and things of that nature. Also, to provide academic relief to students involved in rigorous school-based and non-school-based athletic activities. Now, this has become a crucial point for us, that many of our students take very challenging curricula, and they need some time to be able to do these things beyond the school day and yet maintain their schoolwork. We do have to be mindful that Option 2 is not an exemption from physical education. There's more to it than that, and that's clearly stated in the standards, that it is an alternate way for students to earn credit and extend learning beyond what may be learned in a class setting. This is the reason for journals, logs, end of marking period projects or work to be submitted to show that cognitively what have the students learned through their participation in the extracurricular or athletic program. All right, so one of the biggest things and we heard from everyone here, is maybe some inequities or imbalance between the Ridge High School athletic programs and the off-site programs. In an analysis of our high school sports teams, in any given week, time frame for various sports may range from 7 hours of active participation a week, upwards of as much as 18 hours in a given week. Now, that's certainly not to say that every team is going 18 hours every week, but as a minimum, we have found that it's about a 7-hour commitment to be on any team in the high school. For off-site, in order to meet the standards of physical education, the bare minimum is 150 minutes or 2.5 hours of participation per week. So for the same credit, we have students going anywhere from 7 to 18 hours, and other students just at a bare minimum of 150 minutes. And is that what we wanted, is to provide the bare minimum, or do we want this to be for those students that demonstrate a need for additional study time because of their extra commitment to their extracurricular programming or off-site programming? All right, another area of imbalance was pointed out was the coursework requirement, the computer or paper portion of it. That the fact that the off-site participation required weekly logs of time, and then a summative assessment piece to be done at the end of each marking period. And presently, the Ridge High School sports do neither of these. They're just doing their participation through athletics, which is similar to an exemption. So here are proposed changes for 2022-23. And there's not a lot. A little bit substantive in one regard, but there's not a lot of change happening. You know, first of all is that the changes made for this year are to be held in place. And once again, our objective is to create equality of the expectations for rigor, workload, et cetera, between the off-site and the Ridge student-athlete Option 2 programs. So this would mean an increase in the weekly minimum hours for off-site Option 2 from 150 minutes or 2.5 hours per week to 5 hours. Still less than what the briefest of the high school programs provides. As you see, the minimum Ridge Sport is 7 hours per week, 420 minutes. So, you know, the kids that are involved in athletics are putting in a tremendous amount of time, and it is not necessarily true, we found, for some of the things that in the past had been approved for Option 2. The off-site weekly logs and end of marking period project make up the extra 120 minutes we're saying through what they do. And again, that is not a demanding or especially challenging thing. It's just a way to document what they have done through their participation in their off-site activity. We are proposing that all on-site or Ridge High School Option 2 athletes will now also complete an end of marking period reflection, again, so that we can say that yes, they have met the standards, they are demonstrating this to us through this paper and their participation in their sport. So again, this is not meant to be overbearing or demanding on the kids, but just a way for us to get that information from them. Okay, so I think that's all I have right now, and I am going to turn this over to Ms. Fox, who will finish it up here.
Thank you. So as we sort of wrap up, as all three have mentioned before me, in addition to making some of these changes that have been sort of explained as to the rationale, we also want to improve like our communication, the process, the way it works for students in the school, and the connections between home and school. So a few of the other things I wanted to point out that we're planning, that we will post all deadlines early in the spring for next year. We will include sort of an acknowledgement form in Genesis so that we sort of make it clear to parents and students what we're agreeing to through Option 2. Right? We want to make sure, as much as we might be communicating now, sending letters out next week and the week after, we find that it takes a lot of repeated communication for people to really internalize, understand what these changes are, especially when they're new. So we will have a form in Genesis asking students and parents to acknowledge what these changes are, what these requirements are. We will have a meeting with students in the fall, right, where they can come and hear what the requirements are, again, giving them a chance to ask questions and be sure they understand what everything is. Part of this is certainly asking students to take some responsibility, as has been explained. They're kind of doing something more equivalent to being independent, like at college, so they should be in charge of completing the required paperwork, whether that's a log, a reflection, or getting the application in on time. So that's certainly part of it. Along the way, we want to help them with reminders, email responses when they submit a form that they can save as evidence that they submitted their form. So, and the last bullet there, we're looking to streamline how many times students have to complete the application, maybe once for multiple marking periods if the activity is the same. So streamline there and make it a little bit sort of easier so we don't miss a deadline along the way. I think a really big help will be an effort we're going to undertake coming up now is to vet as many programs as we can, communicate with the community and those programs about what our requirements are so they can sort of think about how they can support kids in meeting those requirements through their programming. That really wraps up what we wanted to share with you and the changes we want to make to the program for next year, the reasons behind it. At this point, what we'd like to do is see if we can answer any clarifying questions for you. Know that this survey will be open tomorrow morning. It's open now. Open now. Go to that link now. And that's where we want you to send your feedback, things for us to think about over the next couple of weeks. But for right now, if you have any clarifying questions, we'd like to give you a chance to ask those. Alicia? Yeah, it might help. Then everybody at home can.
Okay, hi. I guess I'm just confused as to why we're comparing the off-site to the Ridge Athletics when the students are not getting credit for playing a sport at Ridge, they're getting credit for PE. So I don't understand how that goes together. They're not trying to earn a varsity letter by doing something off-site. They're trying to earn the credit from PE. And it's 5 hours compared to the number of hours in PE is significantly more and does not seem equitable in that sense. So I guess...
You want to understand more about the comparison or the equity we're trying
well,
to build?
I'm just curious why we're comparing it to a Ridge athletic. So say, for example, an English class. Kids in AP English are spending a lot more hours than kids in CP English. However, everyone's still getting the passing grade for English for that year. So in my mind, it's sort of the same thing, that yes, of course, kids at Ridge are potentially spending a lot more hours at their athletics, but but the other kids are still doing more than enough to receive the credit to graduate or to receive credit for that course.
One thing I would say about English, and then I'll let you jump in. We do a number of different things to differentiate between coursework, right? So you're right, both students in those two English courses get credit, but they get different weighted credit based on working at a higher level of rigor. So that is one difference but they get weighted credit on their GPA, and that is not something that is the same equivalent in. I understand what you're saying. So I understand what you're saying, but part of the answer to your question is that those other classes are differentiated in different ways. So.
And just to rewind again, we seem to be stuck, and I've had this conversation with many people before, on this 150 minimum. The 150 minimum set by the state is for physical activity, and it's really a K-12 standard. It is not what the state expects a high-level health and physical education program to take when you take into account not just class time, but homework and other assignments that are given between your health program and your physical education. So we have to get off this idea that we can master those standards just by hitting 150 minutes. The other piece, to answer your question about why we're comparing, we are taking two different avenues to provide credit for the same standards. So both programs have to, in some way, shape, or form, demonstrate. They have to give the kids a similar opportunity, and they have to demonstrate, with accountability, that the students have met the standards that are written for health and physical education, because that's what they're getting the credit for. And so what it came down to is that you have to demonstrate an incredibly high level of commitment to this type of activity, knowing that there's a significant number of standards that are not covered when you go and just participate in one of the activities. And so one of the reasons we want to vet these, we want to talk to the coaches. We want to see what's going on. It is very difficult for a single activity, participating in any sport at whatever level, to replace the kind of instruction that you get covering the breadth, if you will, of the core content standards. And so what was looked at was what level of commitment from any type of program would demonstrate, okay, with whom are you working? Certified people that the district hires, someone outside that we don't really have oversight over. How much effort are you putting in, and at what level are you performing, and what types of activities? Like, we look at the activity not just as the participation in that, but a lot of the kids are doing teaching, are doing coaching, and those connect to other standards, and so we take that into consideration. What we believe, though, is if you're going to demonstrate both the hardship of a high-level activity and the rigor of a high-level activity that would then merit separate, outside the district, credit for graduation, that the 300 minutes is reasonable. And so when we're comparing, we're not making them equal, we're trying to make them consistent. One other thing we'd like to point out, we made significant changes this year. And so certain things, applications that have gone on in the past, they were not approved this year. But if you look at the ones that were approved, the overwhelming majority of those already meet the standard. And so for those that don't, we would then certainly talk to the students about what it is they're doing. But again, you're talking about moving up to what equates to about 1 hour a day for the week. When you talk about our athletes, I don't know anybody who really on any week is doing just an hour a day. And then when we merit that with, and again, asking our athletes to do a season end or marking period end reflection, as well as on the flip side, trying to make the program consistent, fewer minutes. But again, we don't know when you're working, so you provide the logs so we can prove it. And then you have at the end of the marking period assessment as well, trying to find consistency between the two ways you can get the same credit. And if you go back to the English question, if we're going to approve something off-site for English, there are multiple vendors that provide English classes that in some way, shape, or form may or may not meet. we're going to hold them accountable, both of them, to the similar standards that we are then providing credit for. And so we had to look at it in a consistent fashion, not just between off-site and on-site, but between how we go about giving credit for health and physical education as we do on the academic side for math courses, for English courses, etc. And what we do is the student applies, we vet the program, we compare it, we have our expert at that point, whether it's a content supervisor, athletic director, supervisor, assistant principal, with the alignment, the standards, the rigor of the actual work, and then we look for assessment that demonstrates that the work was actually done. And that's what we do across the board. This is, we feel, kind of a more fair way to balance both avenues to getting that type of credit. Yeah.
So I'm just curious as to whether when you talk about 300 5 hours, is that a bright line standard? Is that like a minimum? Or are you saying we're going to vet the program, talk to the student, and then make that decision?
So we're part of the, again, we like black and white here sometimes, and so yes, that is seen as a minimum, that there has to be at least that level of commitment through the marking period to demonstrate both a hardship on the student with this time commitment, but also the level of activity that would merit the graduation requirement.
Am I allowed to comment or just ask for clarification?
Right now, we're asking for clarification. One of the reasons we're asking to submit your comments is we want everything in writing so we can put it together and share it with everyone who's going to review. And so we want to be clear on this. That's why I appreciate the questions. But we're hoping that you take the time and you can submit as many different submissions as you want through the form while they collect your emails so we know who to get in touch with in case there are questions. There's no limit. It's wide open through the 25th. So, yeah, Brian.
I have two questions actually. Number one, for on-site athletes, so for Ridge High School sports, was the option of allowing those athletes to have option 2 for the entirety of their season. So for example, basketball started at the end of November. They are playing, I would say they're engaged in physical activity, probably 15 to 18 hours a week, and they're also traveling and sitting and watching the varsity game, and it's a lot of time. They go through beginning of March, end of February, or so I would say probably.
The end of February.
Which is almost the end of the third marking period, but they're only allowed to participate in option 2 currently for 1 marking period. Which means my son had to drop an elective so that he can have a study hall so that he can actually get to work done during the marking period. So was that, did we consider going, I know that I understand the fall sports thing because I also am a fall athlete, but was that ever considered to allow them to have it for the entirety of the season? My second question
Do you want to remember the second question so we can answer the first question? Okay.
Yeah, the first one I could,
Just so the video
yeah.
gets it.
I can answer because I've lived that one. When I started here years ago, it was done seasonally. And unfortunately, we have 3 seasons, we have 4 marking periods, and they just didn't line up. So picture a situation where with 3 weeks left in a marking period, season ends, now a student comes to physical education class and doesn't dress. And we had numerous failing students. And that was a real problem. The having it 1 marking period per season at least aligns that. And I understand it's a challenge for the kids that they have, a few extra weeks in the winter season. And I get that. But at the same time, I know in my own personal situation with my own children when they were high school athletes, they didn't have any option to, and they got it done. And I think our kids can.
it's a lot of time.
Mm.
He gets home at 9:30 on the weekend
No, I know.
and has 4 tests the next day. So that's difficult.
Mhm.
And he's now having to sacrifice education for time that he's spending, which he wants to play the sport, don't get me
Mhm.
wrong. So my second question is, in my opinion, this is essentially forcing kids into physical education because he can't participate in an off-site activity during basketball season because he doesn't have any time to do that.
Mhm.
So he's taking PE right now, which is fine. Have there been any thoughts of making changes to the physical education program that might have some options that are more conducive to what an athlete might need? So, for instance, where they're in the weight room, something kind of like what you're offering?
Yes, absolutely. That's You know, one of the things we did with the freshman curriculum this year was an intro to fitness course, and now an intro to sport course, which we think has been pretty well received. One of our problems in the past with so many students out in option 2, many times we had 1 or 2 teachers scheduled in a period to teach physical education. We couldn't give options. There weren't enough students in class. Many schools, and I'm familiar with them, have an elective-based program where students have the opportunity to choose whether they want to be involved in a sport activity, a fitness activity, something like yoga, things like that, which we're hoping we're going to be able to do with more teachers on staff during those periods. Sure.
Maybe they can get the weightlifting out of the way.
You know, I mean, in a perfect world, as the health and physical education supervisor, I would love to have a curriculum where kids had to take X amount of courses in fitness, in nutrition, in team sport, in yoga, and activities like that. I mean, you know, that's just, right now, it's very difficult for us to do. Okay.
In the application, what the students have applied this year, they have not included travel to and from, and we did have conversations. I know that there are students here who travel to, whether it's a fencing club or gymnastics, you know, gym, that are not necessarily close, and that does certainly add in, and that we've had those conversations. What we have found, though, is the kids who are engaging in those activities are actually meeting 300 without taking that necessary step into consideration. And so, again, the vast majority of the ones, we went through the list of the first 2 marking periods that were said yes to. Even with this shift in off-site, they were already there well above. But so right now, no, the answer would no. It would be the actual activity, because again, the travel time wouldn't really merit, as far as the state would be concerned, consideration for work toward the standard. The state isn't saying any of that, actually. The state is just saying that every student is required to be given 150 minutes of physical activity. That's where I'm going back to. It's not about what the state is. The state's not using that number to judge whether or not a student's met the requirements in the health and physical education curriculum. I think as we go back to it, if you look at why we started the program, which I mentioned earlier, why we then at that point keyed in that number, we have kind of set in everyone's mind that that's the watermark, and that's not really what we're looking toward. We're looking toward the type of activity, the duration of the activity, the impact to the student overall, and the level of rigor within that activity.
I understand. I'm still not quite clear exactly why, you know, what the impetus was for this change. I'm still, like, I've read everything, I'm still not sure. Like, I understand what you're trying to align, you know, I get it. I totally get it. You want students to get a meaningful experience. Like, you want them to get from their activity what the state really wants them to. What are those core curriculum? What are those students need? So I've read it all. I totally get it, but I still, you know, I still don't understand, you know, what the direct force was.
You just said it. That's the to ensure that our program does those things. And I will tell you that from the professional side, and this is why the conversation has gone on long before I got here, that is not what is seen. And so I think, and when we're really talking about the changes that were made, communication aside, which really put on me, but Ms. Howard did an unbelievable job of working through everywhere. We're talking about an increase in minutes, which was already kind of used to this, which we believe is reasonable for off-site. You're talking about a reflection for the on-site. So we have that accountability and connection to standards. And then you're talking about changes to the system that will make things easier for students and families to actually leverage option 2. When we vet the programs, one of the reasons we're vetting the programs is that we have a list of vetted programs, just like we do on the academic side. And if you're applying for option 2 for an activity and one of those programs, your application gets a lot shorter because we already know where you're going and what you're doing. And that makes it easier for everyone. So we're trying to make sure we apply a consistent approach across all of our option 2 programs. And the district has a history of holding those high standards. As an example, financial literacy, which Ms. Fox had to educate me on here in the district, which is a state requirement for graduation, was option 2-able, if I can make up that word. Until we realized that the organizations that were giving the instruction for financial literacy that our students were attending did not meet our standards and we did not believe met the curriculum requirements. So now we still offer an alternate pathway, but we do it in-house. And some people mistake that for option 2, but it's actually not. And so there are examples historically of the district, the professionals here trying to make those hard decisions to ensure, you said it more eloquently than I have, exactly what you said, which is that meaningful experience and a demonstration of the standards that are required. And that's why we're talking.
Do you still have a question? Here, we have a question up here.
Sorry, I have a question, so I must be confused. So is the reason this has been such an issue at Ridge for a while because of the sport kids on campus versus those off?
No.
No, okay. But then, so my son who's a freshman in high school or college, and now I have a sophomore who does track. My track son got home at 11:30 last night because he's on winter track and they went to the Armory. So what is the issue? Because my kids are spending way more than 150 minutes. And yet, I never knew, like, there's kids getting credit that my kid gets for 150 minutes. My kid, older boy, played baseball varsity for 3 years. He got home at 9:30 at night, day after season. So I guess I'm going the other way. Like, you seriously had kids getting credit for this when my kids are doing this? Like, my kids should have gotten double the credit. They should have got an AP credit or something, you know? So I don't understand why this is such an issue then.
To that point, if I may.
Rich, take them.
Hold on,
We want to have a discussion.
hold on.
Well,
Hold on.
Can you cut them off?
Yeah,
Hold on.
folks, we're not
Can you
here
hold
to
on?
have a discussion.
Hold on,
We're here
hold on.
for clarification
yeah.
of questions.
We really want to just
clarifying
take questions so that we can get your feedback. So if you have questions, I don't think you, okay. If you have a question.
Basically, it's the same thing that Alicia said. I still don't understand why we're comparing off-site option 2 with Reed Sports. We should be comparing it to our graduation requirement, which is PE. A student is not required to, yes, the question is why are we comparing?
I understand you don't agree.
Part of our belief is that
I'll let somebody-
the option 2 program is there to provide relief for those students who are spending so much time that they need that relief time. We felt that at 150 minutes, those students do not need that additional time to meet their academic requirements. 150 minutes per week can equal 3 times going to a gymnasium to get a workout at 50 minutes apiece. I don't think that would really impact, a student's academic challenges.
And it certainly would not support mastery of all of the standards in any year of our health and physical education curriculum at that point. And so there are people that probably could make arguments at 300 minutes. We're not doing that, but we are trying to create those avenues at a reasonable level so that students have opportunity when they're engaged, because Mr. Schell said it. We also want to encourage kids to be involved in those activities, right, that we can't offer or don't offer here. That said, though, we can't give credit for all of them. They have to align to the standards. And when we talk about the rigor that goes in, they're not our coaches working with those kids off-site. So you see a difference between the two, but we're trying to apply a consistent approach to both. Sorry, Ms. Fox.
Sure, no problem.
I just had a clarifying question. Is the 5 hours a week, is that a minimum for each individual week, or at least an average of 5 hours a week? And
Yeah,
just as an example, if you have someone that...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We don't have a student who served 4.5 hours in a given week and then fails the course. We look at the logs, and this is as Ms. Howard was saying, as we now get them weekly, we've avoided a ton of issues these last 2 marking periods, a ton, that we've lived with in the past, and students losing credit, coming back a year later and going, oh my gosh, I haven't met my graduation requirements. So the answer is no. As we look at the logs week to week, we look at the average. Are they hitting at least 5? Are we being reasonable? Is this student truly active in the way their application said they would be? It's not oh my gosh, I missed a practice on Tuesday, I'm going to lose 35 minutes, and that's not the stress we want to create. But overall, if you look at the marking period and the logs as they come in, there's clearly at least an average of 5 hours.
This year, I know we've had conversations about
One or two.
Preseason training, not counting. So I would sort of like to hear what the philosophy with that is going forward, whether preseason training will be counted if it is the 5 hours or 300 minutes, whatever, if it meets that. And if, I guess, I don't know how it could be I don't know, just answer that and then I'll maybe follow up.
Okay.
So,
Got it.
just, and for everyone's benefit, because Alicia and I have had many conversations about this, right? One of the, and again, I want to reiterate, they've been great conversations. We want to make sure people are heard, and that as a community, we can talk with each other about these things and eventually make decisions that support the kids as best as we can. And if sometimes we disagree, at least we understand. One of the things that we're talking about is that in order for, if you read the website, we have our professionals. This wasn't just Mr. Shello or Ms. Fox or even just the four of us. They're a team of people, as well as conversations with our Board of Education about what actually met those standards. One of the requirements, again, we talked about was that during the marking period for which you were getting credit, there has to be some type of culminating activity, some type of performance, some type of competition, whether it's once or ongoing, that demonstrates a different skill set than just practice. Because at the end of the day, if you try and compare what's going on in a program where we play baseball and in the winter I'm working out to make sure I'm ready for baseball season, and I almost have to do that if I want to compete at the highest level. I don't wait for baseball season to start playing baseball. We've turned our kids into sometimes one-sport athletes as opposed to those well-rounded kids who had seasons, and we're doing different things. That's somewhat over in many cases because we tell the kids they have to work that hard to be. So to Ms. Martine's point, if the kids are doing that directed toward an outcome of, I want to make on the baseball team and play my best, isn't that the outcome? And we're giving credit for the specific marking period. And so we have to show a diversity of the standards. Just going and lifting weights at a gym or going and working out to prepare for baseball season is not the same as being on the competitive team in that time period. And as we're giving credit, that's what our professionals were measuring. And so I know there's a difference of opinion, but the idea is that during the time period for which we're giving credit, you were not engaged in all of these activities the way we've described them and that they align to the standards. Yeah, you have a question?
So I was never clear why option 2 was taken away from freshmen. I have a freshman who's a 2-sport ridge athlete and also does club. And as we were preparing for this semester or this year, I was told by multiple administrators and counselors, we'll just sign him up for an extra study hall, which I feel like fails just to squeeze in these PE times. He could have taken like an intro to law or marketing or econ. He could have taken something that would have exercised his academics. Instead, the freshman, it was completely taken away just to squeeze this in. And I understand health and Project Adventure, that's always been part of the curriculum. But why was it taken away, and can we think about bringing it back? I mean, it won't help my kid, but for other freshmen that, I mean, they're doing at least 720 minutes of club sports a week, and then the 2 ridge sports. I don't understand.
And so the conversation has been going on as to the impact of our environment here at Ridge on our students. And one of the things we've been recognizing here, teachers, counselors, student assistants, counselors, our health and physical education teachers, administrators, is the unbelievable amount of stress that we put on kids, especially through the transition from WAMS to here. And as you heard Mr. Shello, we revamped the HPE curriculum in ways to try and address that transition and make sure students are going to be healthier and more successful for the long term. And we felt that one of the things that has to happen then is those freshmen have to be in that program. And so that was the driving force, is that we redesigned 9th grade HPE, and we need the 9th graders in it. And what we're saying is that then we have to examine what the student's full picture looks like. Because if the 2 study halls that they would get in the rotation make that much of a difference for an academic course, then something's not lining up right. It's not option 2. And that has to be discussed.
So
one of the things that we noticed, and the reason that we wanted these freshman students, their first year in high school, to take these courses. An example is in the area of fitness. We see kids come through who have learned so many improper things, so many bad methods, so many bad techniques. They come into a fitness center and they use poor technique, doing heavy lifting, such as squats and things of this nature, where they're at a risk of injury. They're just doing improper training. We need to teach these kids these things. And so having them take a course like this their freshman year, we get them right in right away. They're going to learn how to do and train and lift properly, how to design their own fitness program with specific goals, whether it's for strength, for endurance, for changing body composition, what have you. But we've seen so many poor techniques from kids who are athletes who haven't been taught the proper way to train.
My question here is, why are we tying everything to specifically a marking period when we know that on-site athletics extend beyond just a single marking period? Teachers have the ability to exempt students from assignments in Genesis. So why could they not simply exempt a student for the additional weeks of their athletic? Has that consideration been made?
I think the consideration, and you correct me if it's different, on multiple options has been examined. But when you exempt anyone from anything that is a graduation requirement, there has to be a specific reason. The reason can't be that the activity that we were giving them credit for is no longer happening. And that was, I think, the issue. And it's different by season. So if you're in the winter and we give you a choice, it's different than if you're in the spring or in the fall. And it's also different necessarily by sports within the same season. And so we're trying to be consistent, but again, the issue is we have to give credit by marking period. And so if you're not working for a full marking period, we don't have the option to give you part of a 1.25 credit for the marking period. It's not something we can do. Well, it's usually, the issue is it's...
Because they are participating in their sponsor's athletics. They're not really explaining why that can't happen.
Well,
Participating in a school-sponsored athletic, you know exactly what's involved in what is going on.
except that you're not. And that's what, you're at that point not... At that point, as you said, the season's over, and there's 3 weeks left. They are not participating.
Softball will begin March 12th. Practices will begin at that point. The first scrimmage is March 21st, and the new marching period does not begin until April 6th.
Correct.
There's a full 3 weeks that they are not afforded the ability to have options to, and the additional time with which to study, do complete homework. I have witnessed in Genesis teachers choosing not to penalize the students for grades. Why can that not simply apply?
To use your specific example, that's 15 days of a marking period of actual work versus 30 days, twice as much, of not. And yet you're asking us to give credit and exempt 2/3 of the marking period that the activity was not going on. Again, I don't want to go back and forth. I understand that you may disagree, and you can certainly provide us with the feedback, but I will tell you that working with the teachers and the rest, I'm just up here to explain, not necessarily to convince anyone. This is why they moved to a single marking period, because unfortunately it did not line up.
And you are aware that students participating in school-sponsored activities are participating 4 times the amount of time, and much more rigorous activities than they are getting in physical education. A PE class is 4 times a week for 52 minutes. 208 minutes is 3.5 hours, and that's really generous.
And during that time, I'm trying to get off the minutes again, I'm explaining for everyone who's listening. During those minutes, when you're with a teacher, you're doing a multitude of things that you are not doing in any of the minutes that you're in most of these other activities. And yet we are still working with you to give you credit for the entirety of the standards. I'm sorry, Ms. Howarth, your name?
No, it's just, I didn't know if anyone over here had any questions, so I came over.
Yeah, we're going to be out of time in a few minutes, so I want to make sure everyone has a chance to ask a
I want
clarifying
to make
question.
sure
if
if
you have
anyone
it.
who has clarifying questions, that we are able to answer those.
Alicia. Right behind.
Use the mic.
We sort of were talking around it. So in order for the offsite option to count, you must have a game, a tournament, a competition. Is that correct?
Some type of culminating performance or competition. And so when we had fencers and their competitions, we had dancers and their performances. It had to be building to something where you were forced then to perform in a higher stakes activity, part or version of your activity.
So Mr. Shello was just saying how it's so important for our athletes to be trained properly and know how to use fitness properly and all of that. So you're now saying that for someone to compete in 7 to 18 hours of practice, they should do nothing up until that point, and then they start working out for 7 to 18 hours, because that, as we all know, is not correct. So I guess my question is, I still don't understand what the value of one competition or one game is in an entire marking period of improving health, fitness, wellness, all of that. I don't understand how having one game is going to make the difference.
And what I will say again is, we're looking for, sometimes, I mean, you go to class for how many days and you have one test. We are looking for the opportunity of a student in an activity to demonstrate as many of the standards as possible. And so please understand, and we've had the conversation before, no one up here is saying don't be healthy. We're saying the exact opposite. No one up here is saying do what you feel you need to do to prepare. What we're saying is that certain activities do not meet the standards as the state has outlined them. And so we do all we can to vet them, to work with you, to explain that. But at the end of the day, we have to give credit where credit has been demonstrated. So,
I think we're about out of time. So, again, please just send in your feedback on the survey. Do you have one more question?
Usually when we vetted the activities, there were culminating events in some way, shape, or form in the marking period that we were talking about.
But it could certainly.
Correct. And sometimes they certainly carried over as a continuous activity, but they were doing other things like, dress rehearsals. I'm thinking about dance. The dance competition season doesn't usually start until February, March. But they go to conventions where they compete and are judged. They perform here where there's a live event. And so those performances fall into the other marking periods. And so we worked with them as flexibly as we could to allow them to demonstrate those different performances. And like I said, the number of students who were turned away this year even, unbelievably small, and for ones that clearly, as we said, did not demonstrate the breadth or depth of the standards that were needed. That said, even with the increases for off-site, the impact to, if we redid the first 2 marking periods with these standards, the number of kids who would be screened out, and again, we would talk to them to figure out exactly what was going on, if there are ways they could use this to meet their graduation requirements, but it's incredibly small. Sorry? And I'm sure you're going to share that
I was
in the
going to say,
form.
put that on the form, Alicia, and send your feedback. We really want to take it in, kind of look at it all, report back out to the board and to you, and finalize our recommendations sometime in March. Okay. Well, we yep, I heard you. Okay. I hope you'll send that in as well.
Please send that in so we can consider it. Again, we're asking you to send that feedback so it's more than just the people standing in front of you that can review it. So for those people here and for those people who watch the video, send us the feedback so we can get in front of the team.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.